Okay. So today we're going to do everything about the SAT writing test. To begin with, let's talk about the general features of the test, the ones that you probably already know. So this section, for this section, you have a total of 35 minutes, and you have 44 questions to answer in those 35 minutes, which means you have exactly 47.7 seconds per question. You have 4 written passages, and the questions are given throughout the length of the passage, not at the end of the passage, which means you can answer them without like finishing the reading and then going back. Moving on to the topics of these passages, we have 3 different topics, or 3 possible topics: history or social science, which are sort of similar, so we put it in the same topic. Natural sciences such as biology, physics, health sciences, and stuff like that. And then humanities, which would be arts, music, and literature. The passages are not only divided into topics, but they're also divided into types of passages. So we have our argumentative passage, which is someone making a claim and then maybe a counterclaim. So we have to analyze an argument. There's also narrative nonfiction, which is sort of like a story, but about events that are true, that happened at some point. And then just a merely informative or explanatory passage, which introduces some topic or some concept and then discusses it at length throughout the length of the passage. Does anyone have any questions about types of topics? Okay, let's move on to strategies. Okay, so these are some broad swath strategies that you can use in the test that I sort of came up with while analyzing the test for this class. So in writing specifically, you can work on the questions as you're reading the passage. This is recommended because you don't have a lot of time. And the maximum amount of context required is usually an entire paragraph, or at most a preceding paragraph. Like generally, you don't have to have the whole text as context for a single answer. Oftentimes, it's only like a single word, so you can like look at the sentence and you'll already be able to get the answer. As it is in the rest of the SAT, the process of elimination is your best friend, is the best strategy you can do. For those of you who don't know what this is, it's basically just eliminating all the answers you can one by one as you sort of analyze the question, so you're sure that the answer that you're giving is the best possible answer. Because oftentimes with the SAT, what happens is that there are maybe 2 answers that are like, they're good, but there's one that's more precise, that's better somehow. So process of elimination. And then lastly, I mean, all of these things you probably already know, but I'm gonna reiterate, skipping harder questions is a good strategy because oftentimes you won't be able to finish, especially with the writing section, which has a very short amount of time. You might not be able to finish. And so if you skip 1 or 2 that are super hard, that would have like taken you 5 minutes each, you wouldn't be losing as much as if you stuck around trying to solve it and then just like forgot about the rest of the test. Do all those things make sense? Any questions? Okay.
Hello, teacher.
Oh, yeah. Hey, you have a question?
No, I just joined. I am late because I was sending an email.
Okay. Moving on. Problem solving process. So I wanted to not only give you guys strategies and tips, but I also sort of outline what the problem solving process is for me, to sort of give you a mental map of how to proceed in these questions in this section. So what I do, and the 3 steps are sort of scrambled. They're not necessarily done in that same order. But yeah, I read the question first to obviously get a sense of what I'm supposed to do. Then I look at the underlined portion and I identify what it's doing there, what its function is. You could identify the part of speech, or if it's a phrase, you can sort of understand what it's trying to achieve there. If it's a sentence, how it fits into the progression of ideas, that kind of thing. Then, after you read the underlined portion, you will usually have to read at least a little bit of the surrounding context. What comes before, what comes after, to sort of tell where it fits into the narrative of the writing piece. And once you've done that, and you have all of sort of your tools, all of your weapons to tackle the problem, you can eliminate choices by process of elimination to arrive at an answer. So the reason why I'm doing this is because sometimes we sort of get tangled up with not knowing how to begin to answer a question. But if you look at it, it's really straightforward. It's really, I mean, there's a lot of different approaches and different nuances once we get to the types of questions we'll find. But in broad terms, the procedure is pretty simple. These are the three things that you're always going to have to do. So just keep this in mind. Whenever you're stuck, just remember, read the question, identify function, read surrounding context, and sort of that might guide you to at least a reasonable answer. Any questions about this? Cool. Let's move on. So these are some specific tips that I think you should keep in mind. So I came up with all of this while looking at the practice exam. So these are things that I would do to solve the exam. One important tip is check for agreement in person, number, and verb tenses. Many times, what questions are asking is like, what's the correct form of expression of a certain verb, maybe a tense, maybe a pronoun, so you have to look at the person and number and stuff like that. So those three things, just sort of try to keep a mental map in mind of like, okay, the last pronoun that they used was singular, first person, so the next pronoun or the verb should be in agreement with that as well. You'll reduce a lot of mistakes if you keep that in mind. Okay, number 2, checking for subordinating conjunctions. If you remember that last class where we talked, when we went over one passage of the writing test, there was this sentence that began with because, and since it began with because, we knew what the answer was going to be. So that sort of brought to mind that you have to check for subordinating conjunctions because a lot of the times that can help you solve questions of like joining clauses or using transition words or punctuation and stuff like that. Okay. Number 3, aim for precision and concision. So what are these two words? Precision means being as specific as possible. So using the word that most accurately describes what you're trying to go for, the idea that's expressed in the text. And concision means writing things in as few words as possible. Trying to be brief and straight to the point, not like going around and sort of like writing a lot of words for something that you could say in 1 or 2. And the reason why this is so important is because in the SAT, answers are often tricky. You often have more than one answer that sort of fits the function that you're trying to go for. Furthermore, you actually have exercises in which all of the answers are, let's say, decent, they're feasible. I mean, they could fit. It's just that the correct answer is the one that has less words or is more like effective. They use the word effective, for example. And effective means it's precise and it's concise. It goes straight to the point and it goes to the point correctly. So keep in mind, when you have 2 answers from which you can't decide, just think about like which one's the most precise, which one's the most concise, and that could help you sort of break the tie. Number 4, think about how you'd read it out loud to determine punctuation. This is something that I do a lot when I'm writing myself, to sort of know how I would punctuate something. Think about how you'd say it out loud when thinking if it's going to take a comma or a period or a colon. And yeah, this is just like a little rule of thumb that I do. Keep track of your progression of ideas mentally. So remember that placing the sentence exercise where we're asked, like, place it after sentence 1, place it after sentence 2, sentence 3, or right where it is. It's important because obviously you don't have a lot of time. You're not going to make this whole like analysis of what each sentence stands for, like, unless you're saving time, unless you've like done everything else and have a lot of time, which is not a bad idea, by the way. If you have hard exercises, leave them for last and try to save time for them. And maybe you'll be able to like use a longer strategy that will allow you to find the answer. Going back to my point, however, sort of try to keep a mental tally of like, and this is a little trick that I use. Whenever you're gonna get a progression of ideas question, you're gonna get numbers in each of the sentences in a paragraph. You're gonna have a 1 next to sentence number 1. You're gonna have a 2. You're gonna have a 3, and it's gonna be in between brackets for each of the sentences. Throughout the entire paragraph, you're gonna get numbers for each sentence. Whenever you see that, sort of make a mental note and try to keep track of what each sentence stands for. Try to create a sort of progression in your mind. This leads to this, leads to this, leads to this. So begin with the concept. Concept leads into disadvantages. Advantages leads to example. Example leads to refutation. And in the end, conclusion. So you sort of keep in mind this progression of what comes first, what comes second. So when you get that question of placing a sentence, which you know is going to come because that's the only type of question that uses those numbers. When you get that question, you're going to be able to quickly go to what you think is right. And at least you'll have a reasonable answer right from the get-go. And then you can, if you have more time, you can look at it and be like, okay, this might be the one, or this might be the one. But it'll just help you make the process faster. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about these 5 tips? What do you think about this? Do you think this will help?
I just want to tell you, Miss Teacher, that if you could repeat again what you said in the last part, because I was interrupted and I couldn't fully focus on what you said.
That's okay. Yeah. So keeping track of the progression of ideas. I was talking about that kind of question where you get a sentence and it's saying, where would this sentence be placed best? After sentence 1, after sentence 2, 3, or where it is. And I was telling you guys that a little trick that you can do or use is that whenever you're going to get a question like that, you're going to get numbers in the sentence. You're going to get 1, 2, 3, 4. And whenever you see those numbers, you know you're going to have that question. And so whenever you see those numbers, try and keep track of the progression of ideas in your mind. Try to create a little mental map of what each sentence is doing, all the sentences that are numbered, what all of them are doing. So when you read the sentence, when you get to the exercise, you can quickly sort of go back to where you think it would fit and at least have an answer right off the get-go and like have a better chance of getting it right.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. We'll move on now to types of questions. So this is the meat of this class. It took a lot of work, but I went through the entire test and I came up with 10 types of questions that you're going to find and how to approach each of them. And then we're going to do exercises. So we're going to go through the entire test, or at least as much as we can. And we're going to classify each question, classify each passage, and sort of go through this system to help you guys sort of internalize it and be able to have a sort of set of instructions or a recipe in your mind that allows you to go faster throughout the test and be able to determine quickly, like, oh, okay, this is a vocabulary question, so I do this, this, and that. Or this is a subject or verb question, so I do this, this, and that. So I hope you find this helpful. Without further ado, let's begin. Okay, I'm going to read the 10 types first. First type is vocabulary choice. These are all names that I came up with, so if they're not like super good, I'm sorry. So vocabulary choice is number 1. Transition choice is number 2. Writing mechanics is number 3. Verb phrase is number 4. Add or delete sentence is number 5. Idea development is number 6. Pronoun choice is number 7. Sentence is number 8. Correct expression is number 9. And joining clauses is number 10. So I'm just going to go back for a sec because pronoun choice, I renamed it. I just didn't change this part of the presentation. I renamed it to renaming subject. That's what it's going to be called. And I think all the rest are fine. Oh yeah, no, the verb phrase one, I renamed it verb form because it's not always going to be. Anyway, moving on. Number 1, vocabulary choice. So this question asks you to choose a word or phrase among 4 choices. It's generally oriented by the meaning of the word and what you're supposed to, how you're supposed to fulfill that function in that specific place. So the first question we ask ourselves when we see a question like this, and the way it'll generally be presented is simply sort of as either you won't have any question, you just have the 4 choices in an underlined section, or you'll have a short question of like along the lines of which one fits best or which is the best word to express this meaning or whatever. So the first thing you have to ask yourselves is, what function is this word or phrase fulfilling, the underlined phrase? So you read the sentence, you read the surrounding context, and you figure out what that's supposed to be right there. Because the underlined word or phrase will not always be correct, or will not always be fulfilling the correct function. So you have to read the surrounding sentence and find out what function has to go there to make the meaning of the sentence complete. So that's the first thing you figure out. This underlined portion, what function should it fulfill? Based on this function, which of the 4 choices I'm given is the most apt choice? And here you'll be able to eliminate probably 1 or 2 at least, based on like just not being either the right function or the meaning just being very far off. Or maybe not very far off, but far off enough that you'll be able to eliminate it quickly. And then with the choices that you're left and that you're not sure about, look at the level of specificity and identify specific and appropriate connotation. So specificity goes towards precision. So saying, I'm hungry is not the same as saying I'm starving. So you look at which one is the most precise for this instance, and then you look at connotation. So if you remember that exercise that we did where the options, the 2 choices we were between were satiated and fulfilled, here it was a question of not specificity, but connotation. Both of them expressed a feeling of being full, of not needing more, but one was specifically geared towards food and the other one was more abstract. So you look at specificity and you look at connotation to determine the best choice possible. And a little tip is remember the part of speech puzzle piece analysis that we did, sort of like determining all the parts of speech that are present and what's missing based on that. Any questions about this? Nope. All right, let's move on to transition choice. So this you'll have a lot of questions about. You begin a sentence and there's a transition word like also or furthermore or moreover, however, that kind of stuff. In other words, so transition words or phrases begin the sentence and they connect to the previous sentence. So in this kind of exercise especially, it's important to look at the context. Maybe 1 sentence or 2 sentences before, and then the sentence after it and the stuff following the transition word or phrase. So you're trying to sort of understand what the meaning of this word is, or what the function of this word should be based on the surrounding context. That's what a transition word does. It looks at the surrounding context and it's like, okay, here, because the previous information is positive and the following information is negative, we have to use however to sort of create that shift. Or if the previous information is on some topic and the next information is more information on that topic, we use moreover and that kind of stuff. That's how you work with transitions. So what you do is you look at the previous sentence or paragraph, then you read the sentence following the transition word, and you just ask yourself, what's the best way to connect these two ideas? That's it. You guys understand this? Yeah? Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to just ask you, in case I just didn't get quite right. Transition choice also applies usually when you have an underlined sentence in the beginning of a paragraph. Does that transition choice apply to this, or is another part? Just so I kind of have a clear understanding.
Okay, so not really. I mean, you could argue, or I mean, you would not be wrong by calling sentences, entire sentences, transition sentences. But for this type of exercise, we're going to focus on short transitions. When we talk about sentences, we're going to go into idea development for that case, because it's a complete idea that we have to sort of tell if we're going to keep it or not. So there's other denominations for complete ideas.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay. Writing mechanics. So writing mechanics refers to capitalization and punctuation, but mostly you'll be dealing with punctuation and stuff like apostrophes for possessives and stuff like that. So the way you handle this is, as I said in my little tip, you think about how you would read it out loud. So that's like a little interesting strategy that you can keep in mind. But the process, the problem-solving process I go through for writing mechanics question is I read the sentence, then I ask myself, are we connecting clauses with this underlined section? So if you're trying to connect clauses, figure out if what comes before is independent or dependent, what comes after is independent or dependent, and based on that relationship, you figure out what is the best mechanical representation of that relationship. Then you could also have possessive forms. So a lot of options have like apostrophes in the words to figure out if you know how to recognize a possessive form or not. And then you'll also get sometimes at the beginning of a sentence an underlined portion. And so according to where this underlined portion is and what it's doing, you figure out what punctuation could be appropriate. Obviously, starting a sentence, if you don't have a capital letter, I don't think you'd get questions that easy. I didn't see any, but just keep that in mind, obviously. Okay, sorry, any questions about writing mechanics? No questions are dumb. I'm just saying, if you have any questions.
I have one. Sorry for asking a lot.
Yeah, no,
But I had an experience when I was studying on Khan Academy, and I specifically want to talk about possessive form. And as I was taught when I studied English, when like the noun has an S and you need to put the possessive form, usually put the apostrophe after, And does it make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And when I clicked that on my choice, and then when I started to review my answers, it said that it was incorrect, and it put like I don't remember the name, but it ended with S, and then it put the correct where it was apostrophe another S, and I was like, what is that?
So I'm gonna help you understand with a little more depth how that works, because it's not just any noun that ends with S takes an apostrophe after the S and nothing else. It's plural nouns that end with S. So for example, crises, CRISES, plural of crisis, you would only put one apostrophe after the S. But let me see, if you had, for example, a proper noun, Lucas, Lucas S. You would have Lucas apostrophe S because it's singular. So if it's singular, you still use apostrophe S. Okay. Cool. Let's move on to verb phrase construction. So a verb phrase is the verb form plus modifiers plus object. Excuse me. And to solve this kind of problem, we look at the other verb tenses in the same sentence, or perhaps in the surrounding paragraph, to sort of get an idea of the time progression. If there are verbs in a tense in the same sentence, you usually would use just the same verb, unless you're trying to create a sort of time relationship, which I explained before, where you had one verb in past and one in past perfect, or one in present and one in present perfect, that kind of thing. Does that make sense? Okay. Also, just a little side note, because these kinds of exercises not only have verbs, they also might have a direct object with the verb, or they also might have an adverb. So sometimes if you have an adverb, if the adverb enhances the meaning of the sentence, enhancing meaning, it makes it better or clearer, then you choose the option with the adverb if you think it makes it better. And when you have an object, so you'd get like specific phrases with a direct object, then make sure that there's like all the things are in agreement. Okay.
Generally, the correct answer is a shorter one, most of the time, but not always.
Can you say that again, please?
Most of the time, but not always, the answer will be the shorter one.
Yeah, that goes with what I said about concision. I mean, so what we have to keep in mind about longer and shorter answers is as long as the meaning is retained, we prefer a shorter answer. But that is as long as the meaning is retained and is clear in both answers. If the meaning is not retained, if they mean different things, then we don't necessarily go for the shorter answer.
I wanted to ask something about that. I was practicing the grammar section yesterday, and I noticed that the passage that I was practicing from was a like sort of historical, like old, English passage. And in one of my answers, like I used a word that relates more to those times for my answer, but at the end of the day, the answer was just the most simple version. So like I wondered, in those cases, should we take into account the fact that it's old language, or is it more important to just make it as simple as possible? And concise, obviously.
Okay, so this is not a question I can answer fully, and I'm gonna encourage you to find that question and send me a screenshot or something via email, so I can give you an answer that's directly related to that question specifically. Mm-hmm. But towards your general point, I will say that you generally will not see instances in the writing test where the best choice is not the most concise. Now, you might see instances where the best choice is not the shortest one, but within two options or between two options that have the same meaning, I will say in general, or almost always, the answer will be the most concise. But since I don't know what the specific question that you had was, I can't really speak to that specific case and say, oh, this is wrong because this or that. So if you want to send me the question like a screenshot, I'll be happy to answer that.
Yes, I will. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Anyone else about verb phrases or anything? Nope. Alrighty, let's move on. Add or delete a sentence. So this question will usually give you a sentence and it'll tell you the writer is thinking of adding this sentence, blah, 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 or the writer is thinking of deleting this sentence and it'll underline the sentence, blah, 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 blah. So for this question, there's two things. you have to figure out, one, are you going to keep the question if you're thinking about deleting it, or are you going to add it if you're thinking about adding it? And then the second part is why. Why are you going to keep it, or why are you going to add it, or why not? So my strategy for these types of exercises is looking at the surrounding context, because oftentimes these are like transition sentences. So like the one we got in the passage that we were going through last class, it started with though, I remember. And it was about this yogurt passage, I think, where we talked about the negatives of like disposing of yogurt and how it needed more product and stuff like that. And then in the next paragraph, we talked about the positive parts, the positive aspects of the yogurt industry. And so there was a transition there, and we had to determine if it was useful or not and that kind of thing. So look at the surrounding context. Oftentimes these will be exercises where you'll need the most context, because you'll have to sort of understand what the previous paragraph is going at, and then what the next paragraph is going at, and sort of like that. You'll have to get a little bit of a bigger picture. And then think about the function that the sentence is fulfilling. So what function should the sentence be fulfilling, and what function is it fulfilling? Is it fulfilling that function that it needs to? And so, yeah, you think about, is this necessary to the progression of ideas, or does it add something valuable? Because sometimes it might not be like strictly necessary, but it might be valuable to add that detail or something like that. Sorry, any questions about this type of exercise? This one's a little harder, so if anyone.
Yeah, teacher, me, please.
Yeah.
So usually I really see that it comes like in the last part of the like the text in the last paragraph usually. And I just wanted to know if like, how can we determine, do we like look at if it's adding another idea, or is it if it's closing an idea, or like how?
Well, so one of the clues to this is the placement. So if it's at the beginning of a paragraph, it'll often be a transition. If it's at the end, it probably should be a conclusion. Then you look at, do we have those things already? So if it's at the beginning, if we have another transition, then we probably don't need this one. If it's at the end, if we already have a conclusive statement, and this is after that, then we probably don't need it. But then if it's in the middle, it could be a number of things. It can be a counterpoint. It can be a transition in the middle of the paragraph. It could be an example. So you sort of map out the progression of ideas and think, is this actually adding something? So if I had an argument, is this, for example, an example, right, that supports that idea? If it is, then okay, it's adding a relevant detail, even though it might not be strictly necessary. Does that make sense? Cool. Anybody else?
I think also the add any lead sentence usually sometimes goes with the graph. So that sometimes is tricky, because you have to look at the graph, and usually the graph has a lot of data, and in there it shows you a lot of things.
Okay, I will talk about graphs in a little bit. That's another type of question that I'll explain. But yeah, you're right. That's not the same sort of method, and I will go into it when I talk about graphs. So about graphs, that's like a subdivision of this type of question for me, of the idea development question. This is one question that's probably one of the hardest ones, because this is the type of question where you have four answers that are different in content. So there are 4 different ideas, and you have to choose the most appropriate idea to sort of continue the progression of ideas, or to set up an argument, or to complete a meaning, or so you'll have different subject matters. Usually it's like about form and about what's the best way of wording this. But this type of exercise is about what's the appropriate idea for this place in the text. So my method to deal with these types of questions is asking myself first, based on the surrounding context, and the question, because the question also gives you a clue as to what function this underlined portion should be performing, oftentimes. So you ask yourself, what role should this clause or sentence play? And what roles are the answer choices playing? So you sort of try to find that fit between what they're supposed to be playing and what the answers are playing. And if more than one fits the required function, which one is more precise? Which one is more straight to the point? Which one enhances the writing more? You look at different criteria to judge the best fit. So there's a lot of stuff you can hang on to sort of decide which one the best choice is. You look at keywords that determine what's going to come next in the previous sentences. You look at subject-verb agreement. You look at sort of what the functions are for the sentence that come before. If there's an argument, should this be an example? So one example of this type of question, I remember the one about the uses of the acid runoff in the yogurt passage that we read last time. There were 4 different ideas, and then we're talking about a number of uses for the acid way runoff. And the best answer was one about using them as as fuels or something like that, I think. And the reason for that was because we, 1, needed an example, and 2, we looked at a keyword number before our answer that told us that there was going to be more than one example. Does that make sense? Sort of? Okay, I'll take that as a yes. Okay, cool. So specific topic examples for the idea development, because you'll have, this is sort of a broad category. I just didn't want to have like 1,000 categories, because what would be the point of that? So some specific topic examples that I took from this test that I was looking at are determine best supporting detail. So it'll tell you like, this is going to be a supporting detail. So maybe an example or some additional detail about the same topic. So you look around the ideas and you look at the previous sentence and you're like, what's the best detail for this sentence that we had previously? Then you'll get the graph summary question, summarize the graph or analyze the graph and like use the accurate representation of the data or something like that. Then you'll have a completing a description type, for example, where you have like a part of a sentence that is not underlined, and then you have an underlined part that comes after, and you have to complete that information that the sentence is giving. And then you'll have, for example, a sentence that sets up subsequent information, and it'll ask you which one is the best choice to set up the information that follows, or something like that. I will make a stop in the graph information type of question, because this is kind of different from the others. So it's a subtype, I would say, of the idea development, because you have 4 different ideas, but your 4 different ideas you have to choose from are not only supposed to fit into the text nicely, they're supposed to represent the data in the graph as accurately as possible. So you have to look at the graph and try to see if the statements that you have as choices fit with what you see in the graph, and then see if they fit correctly in the underlined portion. Does that make sense? Okay. Renaming the subject. So this is mostly about pronouns. But it's not only about choosing the right pronoun, as I wrote. This was something I wrote before I came up with another sort of nuance to this one. It's not only about choosing pronouns, it's also about deciding if you're going to use them in the first place. So oftentimes you'll have pronoun choices, and then you'll have like leave it as it is or delete. So it'll ask you like if you actually need to use a pronoun, right? Because a pronoun renames the subject, and sometimes it's not necessary to do so. Does that make sense? Right. So the procedure for this type of question is you determine the type of pronoun needed based on the sentence. and you could add a parentheses there, or if you don't need it, right? You determine if you need a pronoun, and if you need it, what type should it be? And what type should it be is related to what kind of sentence it is. Then you check agreement with the verb form, and you check for number and person. So those are your tools for pronoun questions. Anybody have any questions about renaming the subject? Nope. Righty. Let's move on to sentence placement. So placing a new or existing sentence at one of 4 possible locations. This is one of the harder ones, where you have a sentence and you have the numbercitos and you have like, are you going to place it here or here or here or here? So yeah, our strategy is we read the numbered sentences. We try to condense their content into key points to elucidate the progression of ideas to create a sort of, in your mind, you should create sort of like a, do you remember those líneas de tiempo that you did in school where you had like an event and then a little arrow, an event and an arrow? That kind of thing is what your mind should be like when you're reading this kind of, when you're reading these numbered sentences. You try to come up with a key idea in a few words for each sentence, and you sort of try to imagine a little flow chart with arrows leading up to every other sentence. And if you're able to conceptualize it that way, it'll be really easy for you to tell where this little bubble goes in that arrow chart. So yeah, you just find out where the key idea fits best in the progression. It's much easier if you do this key idea thing, because one of the most significant hurdles that you have when doing this exercise is that our short-term memory does not retain information for very long. It's like 30 seconds or something. So if we have a lot of sentences and the paragraph is long, we might forget what was in the beginning in the first place. And we won't be able to remember like what that sentence we're supposed to place it in was. And we'll like go back to look at it and then go back to the answer and then go back to look at sentence 2 and then back at the answer. And it'll just become long and tedious, and you might even like have to start over because you forget or something. And so sort of condensing these sentences into 2, 3 words or something that just tell you what the key thing about them is will help you maintain that idea in your short-term memory and like know where you're supposed to place it much quicker. Any questions about this type of exercise? So we good?
There is something I'd like to add, but this is a general thing,
Yeah.
general piece of advice, and it's to really be interested in what you're reading. So try to read and have fun while reading. I know it might be a bit complicated, but you see, most of the things are very interesting and you can learn from those passages. And I think that enjoying your test, even though it's a bit complicated, it's a very good strategy to do it quicker and also be more aware of the general meaning of the text.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a sort of hand-holding relationship between understanding and being interested. And it goes both ways. It's easier to be interested if you understand it, if it's clear, and it's easier to understand it if you're interested. So yeah, that's for sure a good strategy. Thank you. Okay, so moving on to connecting ideas. So this type of exercise generally combines mechanics, so we're talking about punctuation here mostly, and phrasing choices to connect clauses or ideas. So what we do here is we look at the preceding clause and the posterior clause. This might be like 2 sentences that are connected by the underlined portion, or like there's a comma in between, or there's just an underlined portion, but we have commas in the options for answers. So yeah, we look at the preceding clause and posterior clause and determine the most appropriate way to represent their relationship. Just the one thing to keep in mind here is that a clause has to have a subject and a verb. So if it doesn't, then it's just a supporting detail or something. It's not actually a clause that you have to connect. So yeah, here it's also important to keep in mind how it would sound if you were reading it aloud, and just think about, is it an independent clause, is it a dependent clause, what's the relationship between them both, and how can I represent it accurately? But apart from representing it mechanically, we represent it verbally too by phrasing choices that you'll get, like after the comma, or generally after the comma, to sort of set up that transition between the two ideas, like conjunctions, for example. Okay, anyone else or anyone have any questions about connecting ideas? Okay, goody, let's move on. Next one, okay, this is sort of, I think this is the last one. This is correct expression. So this question, this type of question is what I call any question that doesn't fit into the other questions. Any question that's just a little more complex or just doesn't fit neatly into any single category. So generally these correct expression exercises are just questions that have more than one element from the other types of questions, so you can't neatly classify them into one of them. But I didn't want to create like one new category for each combined sort of question. But the point about these questions is that they're sort of hybrid exercises combining more than one of the following: vocabulary, renaming the subject, mechanics, verb phrases, and transitions. So yeah, this is sort of just me trying to not leave any loose ends. Not leave you without any question, that you don't know how to categorize. So yeah, and a specific example would be like the most apt phrasing to represent an idea. So it's not actually for idea choices. It's not actually about mechanics or verb tenses or any specific word. It's not a sentence. It's not one of those placing things. It's just like there's a clear idea that needs to be represented, and it's worded 4 different ways on the options, and you have to choose what the most apt way of phrasing it is. And yeah, that would be a kind of like correct expression question that I would see. And that's it for the presentation. So what do you guys think?
Wonderful.
Yeah?
I think they are all really useful.
Yeah, well, I
I'm going to
will.
do the same with the reading.
I've never seen something like this. Never.
No, I haven't either. I just made it.
Categories are super helpful.
Yeah.
What's that?
This kind of thing you won't find it on the internet.
I tried to find it, and I looked up in Khan Academy, and they have like only 2 types of questions, so that's lame. This is better. Any questions about any of the content that we've gone over today?
I had a question, but it isn't about this specifically. It's about the reading part. Yeah, I've read about a strategy called active reading, where you just basically, make notes as you read, you underline main ideas, it's like, it has its process. I was wondering, do you recommend we do that during the test, or do you think it takes away too much time? Making
notes is what you mean. Making notes and like underlining and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's like active reading. Like it's a whole process. I think it's a bit too much. I don't know.
So I am going to say that I'm going to do a thing exactly like this for reading for the next class. So you'll have a lot of all of this stuff, like the same sort of setup. I'm going to do like strategies, like the broad things about the test, tips, the sort of problem solving process, and all of the different types of questions and passages and all that. I'm going to go over all of that. But to answer your question, at least what it sounds to me like, it does sound like too much work. what you could do is sort of make a focused active reading strategy where you use that strategy once you see what the questions are. Like you look at the part that you're supposed to look at for the question, and then in that part you can like underline and write little notes that help you determine the answer. Like I do encourage you using that paper, that text, because it's hard to hold stuff in your short-term memory sometimes. I mean, not sometimes. For each and every one of us, our limit's like 30 seconds. So if you have like a lot of information you're juggling to make your decision to answer the question, yes, you can make notes like, oh, okay, this is a verb, this is asking this idea comes after this, and like you write a little arrow saying like this is supporting,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, that kind of thing. Just don't do it for the entire text because reading, the texts are long. So it's time consuming and not efficient to do it for every single part when you don't know if you're actually going to use it.
Yeah. Thank you.
No problem. Anyone else?
Are you going to do the same for the reading part?
Yeah, I just said that.
Oh, sorry.
No problem. Yeah, but I am going to do it. Yeah. I'm actually excited about it. This is like the first time that I've done something like this. It's going to look pretty good in my resume. Okay, so. Oh my God, wait, why is this not working? Okay, good. Yeah, so let's move on to testing. So if we're lucky, today we're gonna be able to go over the entire test together with this strategy. And yeah, so let's look at the test. This is still practice test number 1. So the way we're gonna do this is I want us to do 2 things throughout this test. Apart from answering the questions, because that's like what we're supposed to do, right? But apart from that, I want us to use the strategies that I set up in the presentation to classify the passages and classify each question, to organize our problem-solving process. And it'll take more time now, but once you internalize it, it'll be like you'll see a question and it'll click in your mind what it is and how you're supposed to solve it. And it's just much better. So, yep. This is the same passage that we read before, so I'm not going to read the whole passage again, but I am going to classify both the passage and the questions. So this one about Greek yogurt, what type of passage do you think it is? Is it argumentative? Is it narrative? Or is it explanatory? Anyone?
Explanatory.
Yep, good. So passage number 1 is explanatory. And what's the topic? Is it social sciences, natural sciences, or humanities?
Natural sciences.
Yes.
Yep, natural sciences. So that's it for the passage. And now let's move on to the questions. So question number 1, which we had answered D last time. What type of question is it?
Are you sharing the passage in your screen because I can't see it?
Yeah, me neither.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm supposed to share. Yep. Oops. Are you seeing it now?
Yes.
Yeah, now you
Yep.
Yep. Oops. Okay. So number 1, the type of question that we have is there's one single word and we're supposed to choose one based on meaning. So what type of question is this?
Vocabulary choice.
Perfect. And vocabulary choice, vocabulary choice is sort of a broad term because there's a lot of different word, I guess parts of speech that we can choose, that we're supposed to sort of discern. So I just subclassified it as like vocabulary choice, verb, because it's useful to know like what kind of word you're looking at in this kind of question. Yeah. So I'm just going to go quickly through this first passage. Number 2, which choice provides the most relevant detail? So we have 4 different ideas, and that means that our question type is idea development, because the options are all different subject matters. They're not like different ways of saying the same thing. Number 3, the only differences between the choices, oh no, there's actually 2 differences. There's verb form and writing mechanics. So I would call it correct expression combining verb form and writing mechanics. That's what number 3 would be. Number 4, this is purely mechanics, just like semicolon, colon, comma, that kind of stuff. And number 5 is sentence placement. Number 6 is add or delete. So as you can see, we have yes and no, and then 2 different choices for each, depending on the reasoning for our answer. Then we have just a simple vocabulary question, but this time it's a preposition, what we're looking for. The number 8 is verb phrase. Like, yeah, there's an it there, but it's mostly a verb phrase question, or verb form question, sorry. Okay. Number 9. This one is a transition choice question. So we have also in other words, therefore, for instance. Are you guys all following? Do you all agree with my categorization for now?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yep.
Moving on to the satiated question. This is again vocabulary, because the difference between the answers are lies in their meaning. And this time it's an adjective, what we're looking for. And then number 11, we are looking at combining ideas. That's what we're doing in this case. Because we have like a comma and something before, something after, and a combination between mechanics and phrasing to combine 2 clauses. Do you all follow?
Yep.
Right. Cool. I'm gonna go get some water for a second. I'll be back in like 20 seconds.
Hey, qué genial realmente que categorizó así todo. Va a ser más fácil.
Encima de él, qué genial. Ahí listo.
It was more like 10. All right, I'll read through the passage quickly, so we don't waste a lot of time reading the passage. So make sure you're paying attention, because I'd rather not have to go back through every single passage.
That's right.
Okay, dark snow. Most of Greenland's interior is covered by a thick layer of ice and compressed snow, known as the Greenland ice sheet. The size of the ice sheet fluctuates seasonally. In summer, average daily high temperatures in Greenland can rise to slightly above 50 degrees Fahrenheit, partially melting the ice. In the winter, the sheet thickens as additional snow falls, and average daily low temperatures can drop to as low as 20 degrees. Our first question is, which choice most accurately and effectively represents the information on the graph, in the graph? No change, B, to 12 degrees Fahrenheit, to their lowest point on December 13, to 10 degrees Fahrenheit and stay there for months. So we know that this kind of question is the idea development, subtype, graph information type of question. So they are telling us already that we want to represent the information on the graph. That is what we should be doing here. All of the choices represent the information in the graph and fulfill the same function. We just need to know which one is the accurate one. So we read the graph and we look at no change, as low as 20 degrees. We're looking at winter and the lowest temperature. So what I see here is 12 degrees marked here as the lowest temperature. So 20 is not going to be it. December 13 is not winter. for them because it's the northern hemisphere that we're talking about. Oh no, sorry, it is, isn't it? Yeah, no, it is. It is. Yeah, it is. Sorry, never mind. But it is not the lowest point. That's what we have for December 13th. And then we have to 10 degrees Fahrenheit and stay there for months. So we're not sure if it actually gets to 10 degrees. Maybe it does. I think they're pointing at the lowest point, but maybe it does. However, it does not stay there for months. So we only know that the only true piece of information here is that it gets to 12 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the right answer. So right answer for 12 is B. Moving on. Typically, the ice sheet begins to show evidence of thawing in late summer. This follows several weeks of higher temperatures. So number 13 asks, which choice most effectively combines the two sentences at the underlined portion? So this is combining ideas. As I told you, this can also work with actual sentences, like putting the underlined portion in the middle. And
Wonderful.
the 4 answers, I would say, are decent representations of what we should be doing here. But first, letter D does not have a comma before the coordinating conjunction. So that's one we can eliminate immediately. And B and C have a sort of unnecessary coordinating conjunction and pronoun that we could shorten into just a gerund after the comma. So letter A would be the most accurate conjoining phrase in this case. Does everyone understand why this is the answer?
Yeah.
Okay, this is an example where we're looking for concision. We have 3 answers that are working fine to do what we want them to do. We just want to make it as concise as possible, and that's the answer. Okay. 14, transition choice. So okay, let's look at what comes before, what comes after. Typically, blah 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 blah, blah shows evidence following blah 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 blah. Evidence of thawing following weeks of higher temperatures. That's what we keep in mind from the previous sentence. And then, for example, in the summer, blah, 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 virtually the entire Greenland underwent thawing at or near its surface by mid-July, the earliest date on record. So before we're talking about thawing in late summer, right? And then we're talking about thawing by mid-July, which is reasonably early summer. So we can sort of discard, for example, because the following sentence is not an example of what we're talking about before. It's actually an exception or an example of, well, not really an example, but I guess like an outlier, a situation that doesn't fit what we expressed before. As such, it's sort of the same thing as for example, so we can delete that too. We can discard that too. And then we're left with however and moreover. Moreover is a transition word that indicates additional information on the same topic, on the same vein, let's call it. And so since this is sort of a like conversion, an outlier, moreover wouldn't really work because we're not supporting what's said before. We're presenting a situation where this didn't happen. So however would be the right choice. Does that make sense to you? Make sure to ask questions as I'm going, okay? No questions are stupid. Alrighty. Number 15. I'm sorry, I'm going to keep reading. Blah, 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 blah. Most scientists looking for the causes of the great melt of 2012 have focused exclusively on rising temperatures. The summer of 2012 was the warmest in 170 years, records show. But Jason Box, an associate professor of geology at Ohio State, believes that another factor added to the early thaw. Okay, so this is, oh my God, what was it called? It wasn't a nominative. Okay, it doesn't matter. It's just something that's like renaming the subject. That's what we're doing here with this clause. And if you remember correctly, we do this, we enclose it in between commas. So Box, comma, an associate professor of geology at Ohio State, comma, blah, 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 blah. So the only option that accurately shows this relationship is C. So our correct answer is C. Does that make sense to everyone? Good. Okay. Believes that another factor added to the early thaw. And then this is, again, connecting clauses. We have mechanics and phrasing. So we have thaw, semicolon, the dark snow problem. Thaw, semicolon, and it was the dark snow problem. So B is immediately wrong. We can tell because it has a coordinating conjunction, but it has a semicolon instead of a comma. So that doesn't really work. Then C, we have thaw, colon, the dark snow problem. And then we have in D, thaw, semicolon, being the dark snow problem. So D doesn't work because whatever follows a semicolon or a colon has to be an independent clause. And adding the word being makes it not independent, makes it dependent. So we're in between A and C. And the way we define this is looking at the two clauses, are they equivalent or is there a subordinate relationship between these two independent clauses? And what we see is that this second clause, the dark snow problem, is explaining or is an example of what we're talking about before. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And I just want to clarify that I made a mistake in my reasoning. The answer is correct. It's C. But it isn't an independent clause, actually, what comes after thaw. Just if any of you were going to bring that up, I realized that it's not. However, it works within the frame of like setting up an example. Another factor, blah, 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 the dark snow problem. It's an example relationship. And so you see it's subordinate and D is the answer. Okay. And the reason, I'm just gonna go back there for a second to make sure there's no loose ends. The reason why D was wrong is not because it subordinated the clause, it's because it's redundant. You could use a comma, being, to set up an example, or a comma such as, but you cannot use a colon and then such as or being, because a colon already portrays or conveys that relationship of setting up an example or an explanation. Does that make sense? Okay.
So
Yes.
it would have been a semicolon instead of a colon if we were talking about something that wasn't an example. So if it was an independent clause, but it wasn't an example, right?
Yeah, so a semicolon, if you recall what I taught you about it, is that it's an independent clause first. It has to be an independent clause, which this is not. So that's why it's wrong, actually. And apart from being an independent clause, it has to be an idea that's not explaining or an example of what comes before. It has to be equivalent, but similar, which is why we don't like actually separate them with a period, but with something a little less
Close.
divisive as a semicolon.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Moving on. According to Box, a leading Greenland expert, tundra fires in 2012 from as far away as North America produced great amounts of soot. Some of it drifted over Greenland in giant plumes and then blah, 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 blah. Okay, so we have a comma, some of it. So if this sounds wrong to you, you're on the right track, because some of it is using a pronoun like setting up an independent clause is what it's doing, with some of it drifted over blah, 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 blah. And it's sort of setting up an independent idea that can stand on its own. So a comma would not be enough to separate it if we used that. Oh, sorry, I didn't set up the type of question that it was. So yeah, so this one is about renaming the subject. Yeah, we're talking about referring back to, or not the subject in this case, I guess. It's referring back to suit. So are we renaming suit or not? And how? So one of the options is delete. So can we delete suit and not rename it? Like say, produce great amounts of suit, some drifted over Greenland in giant plumes of smoke, and then fell, blah, 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 blah. The reason why we cannot delete this is because we do need to mention suit again, unless we use the semicolon, but it's not there. So because there's a comma, we have to refer back to suit. But if we learn a thing or two about pronouns, is that we use pronoun to not repeat the subject again. So saying some suit would be kind of dumb if we have pronouns that we can use to rename it in a less repetitive way. So we're left between of it and of which. So this comes down to what type of pronoun we should use. And which is sort of an explanatory pronoun. So that's the kind of pronoun that we're supposed to use here, because it subordinates that clause to what comes before. Does that make sense? Cool. Just to add a little thing, we use a subordinating pronoun sort of to make sure that the comma is not a problem. Otherwise, if it wasn't subordinate, we need to use a semicolon or a period. Okay. Drifted over Greenland in giant plumes of smoke and then fell as particles into the ice sheet. Sorry. Yep. So that happened. This question is about verb form. So we have fell, falls, will fall, and had fallen. So what I said about verb form questions is we look at the verbs that we have in the previous sentence to sort of create a progression of time. And we have verbs in the same sentence. So we have produced, drifted, and so those are simple past. So it follows that the next thing we use is simple past as well. So fell is correct. All of the others are not in agreement with the verb tenses that we're seeing before that. And then just to make sure that we know why we're not using a sort of past perfect, we have the word then. And so the word then tells us that it's a progression in time in that same tense, right? It's not, so it drifted and then fell. Alrighty, moving on. Scientists have long known that soot particles facilitate melting by darkening snow and ice, limiting. So we have its, contraction for it is, the pronoun its, then we have their, which indicates a place, and the other form of their, which is a pronoun referring to a plural subject. So we obviously know that we need a pronoun here. This is renaming the subject, or an object at least, which in this case is ice, renaming a noun. So we know it's a pronoun, and the contraction its is wrong. So we're left with its, their, and their. We know that THERE is not the right type of pronoun. In this case, it's not a personal pronoun, and that's what we need. So we're left between its and their, and it comes down to what person are we supposed to put this pronoun in? Okay. And the key to determining what person is what is the object of the verb darkening in that case. Darkening snow and ice. We're darkening two things. So even though we don't have a plural form, we have two singular forms that are both objects. So it might be confusing to you because we have singular form, but it is still there. that we're going to use here because we have two of those. And we're referring to both of them, limiting their ability to reflect the sun's rays. So D is the right answer. Does everybody understand why? Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay. The result is a self-reinforcing cycle. As the ice melts, the land and water under the ice become exposed. And since land and water are darker than snow, the surface absorbs even more heat, which is related to the rising temperatures. So, our question asks, which choice best completes the description of a self-reinforcing cycle? Can anybody tell me what type of questions?
Because
The
it's
type of question this is?
absent. No, it's not absent.
It's an idea development question because we have four different ideas, four different concepts in as our options. Even though they're talking about the same thing and fulfilling the same options, we're talking about different phrasing and different focus. Like one talks about the rising temperature, one mentions the surface, one mentions cooling, and one mentions melting. So that's why we have different ideas here. And we're asked which one fulfills the description of a self-reinforcing cycle. So the cycle is melting, ice becomes exposed, darkened land and water, surface absorbs more heat, and if we're going to fulfill a cycle, we have to go back to the beginning, and we began with melting. So to fulfill this definition of a self-reinforcing cycle, we go back to melting. Leads to additional melting is the correct answer. Do all of you understand why this is the correct answer?
I think
You're nodding your head.
I think the key word here is cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. In this case, we need to look beyond just the simple rules that we established before. It's a self-reinforcing cycle. So a self-reinforcing means it happens like it itself. It brings about itself. So it happens over and over again without anyone else having to intervene. So a cycle, obviously, as you said, means that whatever began the cycle comes back again at the end of the cycle. So yeah, D is the right answer. Does anyone not understand still? Okay. Let's move on to 21 and 22. So look at this. You know what's coming. Okay. Box's research is important because the fires of 2012 may not be a one-time phenomenon. According to scientists, rising Arctic temperatures are making northern latitudes greener and thus more fire-prone. The pattern Box observed in 2012 may repeat itself again with harmful effects on the Arctic ecosystem. So, in this case, we have a question about correct expression because we combine the combining ideas type of question with the verb or the vocabulary choice type of question because it's also about phrasing, but not only about phrasing after the comma, but about phrasing before the comma as well. So it's not just combining, it's also setting up the previous clause in accordance to what comes before. So, why is A wrong? Can anyone tell me?
Because it's redundant.
Exactly. Words repeat again.
Yep. Okay, so A is gone, and then D is gone too, because it's also redundant because we use the word may. May already indicates possibility. So may repeat itself possibly doesn't make sense. We should just use, if we wanted to reduce the power of may, we just use might. And it's it's the same meaning as using those two words. So there's no reason why we should do that. Okay. So we're left with just itself, comma, with blah, 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 or itself with damage and harmful effects. So if we did C, we would have itself, comma, with damage and with harmful effects. Again, this is redundant
Yeah.
because damage and harm are the same thing. They're synonyms. So the most concise way we can phrase this is just may repeat itself, comma, with harmful effects on blah, 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 blah. Okay. So 21 is done. That's B. And then we have the big bad question. To make this paragraph most logical, sentence 4 should be placed. Okay, so for this one, I'm gonna go ahead and try to condense the key ideas for the sentences that matter here. So, sentence 1. Research important because it's not a one-time thing, right? So basically what it's saying, not a one-time thing. Sentence 2, according to scientists, rising temperatures, so it's talking about why it might not be a one-time thing. Because temperatures are rising, and so there's more fire possible, or it's more fire prone. Then sentence 5 is talking about the next step for Box and his team is to travel, blah, 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 and do research. So travel, research. And where it is now is after sentence 5. Or is it not? No, sorry, before sentence 5. Yeah. So it's after sentence 3. And sentence 3 is talking about why it might repeat itself again with harmful effects on the Arctic ecosystem. So it's sort of reiterating number 1. Number 1 was sort of the setup. It's not a one-time thing, or may not be a one-time thing. And 3 is because of the evidence we presented in number 2, this is why it might not be a one-time thing. This is why it might repeat itself again. It may repeat itself again. Or repeat itself, sorry, that was redundant. So sentence 4, currently organizing an expedition. So this is research expedition. And so 1, 2, and 3 have nothing about a research expedition. Number 5, however, talks about the next step, which is research expedition. So it's talking about we need to do this research expedition. And number 4 is saying we're organizing the research expedition. So that's why the correct answer is placing it after sentence 5. D. Is this clear?
Wonderful.
Cool.
Yep.
Great. So see, it's not that bad. It's not that bad once you're able to sort of, okay, I get it. It's not that easy. But what if you're able to go through the others quickly and make a little bit of time to go a little deeper in this question and do this thing that I just did? It's not incredibly difficult. You can train yourself to do it better, to look at a sentence and sort of come up with the key parts quickly. And it's generally related to the subject and the verb. Those are generally the key parts, and then we look at how they're modified to understand the meaning of the sentence. But it's generally in the subject and the verb. So if you look at sentence 1, for example, research important. Research is important. Because sets up a subordinate clause, fires may not be one-time phenomenon. Does that make sense? So there's 2 ideas there. Research important, fire may not be one-time phenomenon. And there's a because connecting them. Then we look at the next sentence. according to scientists. So according to scientists doesn't really matter. You can tell. It's just a sort of additional phrase that is not vital to the meaning. So Arctic temperatures making latitudes greener, fire prone. So latitude becomes greener and more fire prone. And this we know is evidence of what we say before, that it might not be a one-time phenomenon. The fires might not be a one-time phenomenon, because we talk about fire again. So that's just like looking at the key parts first, and then branching out towards the modifiers to understand how the meaning is created helps you retain the key idea of the sentence. And especially if you're able to relate sentence 2 to sentence 1 and sentence 3 to sentence 2, when you're doing this, you might even realize already, oh, sentence 3 doesn't really fit too well with sentence 2. It seems like there's something missing there. And it'll be easier for you to already know where the sentence that you're looking at should go. All right. Let's move on to passage number 3. Co-working, a creative solution. When I left my office job as a website developer at a small company for a position that allowed me to work full-time from home, I thought I had it made. Gleefully traded in my suits and dress shoes for sweatpants and slippers, my frantic early morning bagged lunch packing for a leisurely midday trip to my refrigerator. The novelty of this comfortable work from home life, however, soon got worn off quickly. Okay, that's horrible. Soon got worn off quickly. Soon and quickly is already redundant. And then, okay, got worn off is kind of, it sounds really weird. So, this is a narrative type of passage, correct? So because it's a narrative type of passage, it's talking about things that happened and things that are happening. It's narrating a story in past tense as if it's happening, specific events. It's putting specific timestamps on what's happening. So we know that we cannot use a perfect tense. If we're talking about a specific progression of ideas that tells us when something happened, we're not talking about perfect tenses. We're talking about just the normal tenses. And we know it's in the past. So the only past form here is war. I'm sorry, there's 2 actually. There's C and D. But we have promptly war and then war. Which one is the correct answer? Can anyone tell me? One person.
Or
Okay. Why, Catherine?
well, promptly is already redundant because you have off quickly, right? So
Yeah, exactly. Promptly is basically the same as quickly. So we don't need to put both there. So it's just wore off quickly. D is the correct answer. Anybody understand? Good. Moving on to number 24. Within a month, I found myself feeling isolated despite having frequent email and instant messaging contact with my colleagues. Having become frustrated trying to solve difficult problems, no colleagues were nearby to share ideas. So, yeah. A, no change. Let's talk about the type of question this is first. I would say this is a correct expression sort of thing, because we're talking about combining ideas a little bit and then also about vocabulary choice. And it sort of goes to what I explained about correct expression questions that talk about the most apt phrasing for an idea, right? Because our 4 answer choices are the same idea, but phrased in different ways. So yeah, this is an example of a correct expression exercise if I ever seen one. Okay, so all of our answer choices are conjugated correctly. So there's got to be something else that's creating this difference between them. So if we look at the previous sentence, we read, within a month, I found myself feeling isolated despite having frequent email, blah, 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 blah. So if we look at this new sentence, having become frustrated trying to solve difficult problems, no colleagues were nearby, is redundant with I had become isolated. We're repeating the same thing, so it's not necessary to put something there. So it's got to be something else. Colleagues were important for sharing ideas. I mean, it's not wrong, but we're also not addressing the issue of isolation. I mean, yes, they are important, but they're not there. And we're not addressing that with that B choice. Having become frustrated, blah, 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 ideas couldn't be shared. It's not wrong, again, but there's no sense in writing having become frustrated, blah, 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 ideas couldn't be shared, because that has nothing to do with it. Your frustration has nothing to do with the fact that you can't share ideas. It's not a consequence relationship in that case. Your frustration leads to something, but it doesn't lead to the ideas that can't be shared. The ideas that can't be shared were already true, and that's why you're frustrated. A gerund phrase like this is setting up generally a sort of causal relationship. Having gotten there quickly, I was okay with waiting. Because I got there quickly, I'm okay with waiting. Because I had become frustrated, I missed having colleagues nearby to consult. Does that make sense to all of you?
Yeah.
Perfect. Alrighty, so let's move to number 25. It was during this time that I read an article into co-working, about co-working, upon co-working, or for co-working. This is vocabulary choice for preposition. And we choose about, because that's a relationship between article and co-working spaces that we're looking for. It was an article that discussed co-working spaces. It's not like expressing movement into, it's not expressing something that's on top of co-working spaces, and it's not expressing a purpose for co-working spaces. Okay. I'm gonna go to the bathroom for a sec. So.
Lucas, tu micrófono está prendido.
A propósito estoy haciendo.
Estaba soplando, ¿verdad?
Sí.
Me pillé.
Puedo tirar una bomba controversial como siempre. Así, una bomba gigantesca.
Y vos tirás nomás los preguntas.
A ver.
No, espera que ahí Catherine se silenció y justo quiero ver su reacción, así que voy a esperar a que vuelva.
You can do that after class.
Ahí volvió.
Okay.
Oh.
Okay. Just rained on your parade. All right. Can you all hear me fine?
Yep.
Okay. Good. Moving on. The article published by Forbes magazine explained that co-working spaces are designated locations that, for a fee, individuals can use to conduct their work. The spaces are usually stocked with standard office equipment, such as, okay, so this is purely a writing mechanics question. Do we put a comma after equipment? Do we use a colon or a comma or nothing after such as?
No change.
Why?
Because such as I think
Yeah.
it's a subordinate clause.
Just you don't use comma, but I don't know the exact reason.
Because remember I explained that in that colon exercise that colon and then being was redundant because we could just use comma being or only the colon. And I said such as was another example of that. So yeah, this is sort of it's not a subordinating conjunction. It's such as, it's analogous to colon. It sets up an example, but the clause is still sort of like equal rank of sorts. It's not like actually subordinating it. But there is a comma because it is a different idea. Yeah.
I think, I don't know if you said, but I think the best choice, the answer choice is C. I don't know if you mentioned that. Or do you think it shouldn't? Because like, usually, like my opinion, putting comma before such as seems like you're interrupting a sentence that is, like,
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain it, but like grammatically or in terms of punctuation seems odd. I might be wrong, but that's how I see it.
You are interrupting the sentence. So I agree with you about that. But the thing is, you do want to interrupt the sentence because you're going to a different idea now. You're talking about the spaces that are usually stocked with standard office equipment, and then you're already going into examples of those equipment or that equipment. So you do use a comma, and such as, comma and such as works as something that you do instead of putting a colon there, because in this case it just flows better.
That makes sense. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, number 27. The type of question this is transition choice. Yeah, so in these locations, however, the spaces often include blah, 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 blah. In addition to equipment, the spaces include blah, 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 blah. For these reasons, the spaces include. Likewise, the spaces include. Okay, so likewise makes no sense because we're not talking about two analogous ideas that sort of fulfill the same function or something. We're not able to connect it with likewise in that case. For these reasons, isn't what we're doing or what we can do here either, because we're not really, like the previous sentence is not really an explanation of what comes after. It's not the cause or the reason towards it. It's sort of like a different, they're both different reasons in any case. They're not like one being the explanation of the other or the cause of the other. In addition to equipment, that could work, right? Because it has equipment, and in addition to equipment, it also has small meeting areas and blah, blah, blah. In these locations, however, the however there is ruining everything because there's nothing that we're contrasting between what's said before and what comes after. So in addition to equipment, letter B is the correct answer in that case. Okay, number 28. The cost of launching a new co-working business in the United States is estimated to be approximately $58,000. The writer is considering deleting the underlined sentence. Should the sentence be kept or deleted? So for this, we look at what comes before. and what comes after. So the main article will explain that co-working spaces are blah, blah, blah. Co-working spaces have this, they have that, and the cost of launching a new networking business is blah, 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 blah. Doesn't make a lot of sense, but let's look at what comes after. Maybe that'll make sense. What most caught my interest, though, was a quotation from someone who described co-working as melting pots for creativity. So this one's talking about what co-working spaces are and what they're equipped with, what they have. And this is talking about how they influence creativity. There's no reason to have something about their cost here. So no, we do not keep it. We delete it. Why? Because it blurs the paragraph's main focus or because it repeats information. The problem here is not repeating information. The problem here is that it makes no sense to put that there. It blurs the focus of the paragraph with a loosely related detail. So C is the right answer for number 28. Let's move on to number 29. What most caught my interest, though, blah, 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 melting pots of creativity. The article refers to a 2012 survey in which 64% of respondents noted that co-working spaces prevented them from completing tasks in a given time. So here it is, the question's asking about graph information. We need to make sure the information is accurate with what we see on the graph. At this point, the writer wants to add specific information that supports the main topic of the paragraph. Yeah, but based on the graph, obviously. Which choice most effectively completes the sentence with relevant and accurate information based on the graph above? So 64% of respondents noted that co-working spaces prevented them from completing tasks in a given time. Is that what we're seeing here? Jeremiah, you're nodding yes. Why? This is what we're looking at. Completing tasks in a given time.
So like the 8% was, well, what's the function there? That confuses me a little bit.
Positive impact
Ah,
and negative
got.
impact. So the reason why this is wrong is because it's saying that 64% prevented them, saying that that co-working spaces prevented them from completing tasks in a given time. And this is stating that 64% stated a positive impact, which means it helped them. So A is wrong because of that. It's not accurate. Let's see B. 71% of respondents indicated that using a co-working space increased their creativity. So 71% here in creativity indicated a positive impact. So it's reasonable to interpret it this way. Up to now, that's the right answer. Letter C. Respondents credited co-working spaces with giving them 74% of their ideas relating to business. So look at this. We have 74% positive impact in ideas relating to business. Why is this wrong? This is wrong because the fact that the co-working spaces had a positive impact in their business-related ideas doesn't mean that the co-working space gave them the ideas. You can't really credit the space with giving you the idea. Maybe they benefited your process. They helped you concentrate or something like that. But this is a misrepresentation of the data. It's not wrong, but it's misrepresented. They draw inaccurate conclusions from what is said in the data. D, respondents revealed that their ability to focus on their work improved by 12%. Ability to focus, 12% indicates negative impact. So first, it indicates negative, not positive impact. But second, again, this 12% doesn't indicate how much their concentration increased. This doesn't indicate how much the concentration increased. This just indicates that 68% of people said that there was a positive impact. But we don't know, and we have no way of measuring how positive the impact was. So that's why only B is an accurate representation of the data. Okay. The article goes on to suggest that the most valuable resources provided by co-working spaces are actually the people whom use them. Something's wrong. So this is, again, I would say correct expression combining subject renaming and verb phrase or verb form. And clearly whom is wrong here. It sounds so bad. And just to remind you of what whom was doing, whom is a direct object or the object of a preposition. For whom, to whom. I think you can even say like by whom or something like that. But you do not use it without like as a subject. Who is the subject and whom is the object? That's how it works. So A and B are wrong. And then the people being plural, who uses it or use it? People who use it. So D is the correct answer in this case. Okay. We have 7 minutes. Let's see if we can complete. Well, we probably won't be able to complete the test, but that's fine. We've done a lot of work today. Okay. See that? Okay. Thus, even though I already had all the equipment I needed in my home office, I decided to try using a co-working space in my city. Because I was specifically interested in co-working's reported benefits related to creativity, I chose a facility that offered a bright, open work area where I wouldn't be isolated. Throughout the morning, more people appeared. Periods of quiet during which everyone worked independently were broken up occasionally with lively conversations. So let's just go quickly and try and find the key ideas. So, though I had the equipment, I decided to try. So this is the key point here. I decided to try using a co-working space. Okay, so trying it out. Because I was specifically interested, blah, 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 I chose this. Okay, what facility did I choose? I chose a bright open work area. All of this is subordinated. So decided to try, blah, 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 blah. I chose this facility. Then throughout the morning, more people appeared. So this is already telling us after he chose it, this is already when he is there, right? This is the decision-making process. This is when he's already there. Periods of quiet, doing blah, 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 were broken up. Okay. So this is also talking about how it was after he got there. Periods of quiet, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So look at this. After filling out a simple registration form and taking a quick tour of the facility, I took a seat, blah, 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 blah. So we want to add it. And what is this doing? This is telling us registration form, quick tour, took a seat, and got right to work. So this is the connection between the planning and when he's already there. This is the process where he drove there, filled out the form, quick tour, took a seat, and got to work. And that is why it is placed after sentence 2. Not that scary anymore, is it? Much better than before, at least. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's better. Easier, at least. I liked the experience so much that I now go to the co-working space a few times a week. Over time, I've gotten to know several of my co-working colleagues, another website developer, and goes on to list 4 examples. So yeah, we're listing examples. What do we know about listing examples? What punctuation do we use? Anybody?
Columns.
Great. Okay, so the answer is A, no change. Moving on to 33, even those of us who work in disparate fields are able to share advice and help each other brainstorm. So, share advice, help each other brainstorm. That's the things that even those who are in different fields allow, or what it allows us to do. So, here, it's more about the connotation of the wording. Vocabulary choice is what I call it in this case, because we're sort of trying to use the right phrase, and we're looking at connotation and meaning of what those things are. So the thing here is we're looking at the tone of the writing. The tone of the writing is very lighthearted. It's talking about benefits, and it doesn't go too deep into any sort of emotion. So proclaiming our opinions sounds very political, sounds very, very like business meeting or like sort of arguing or debating. And that's not what's happening here. This is very lighthearted. This is like a space that promotes creativity. We're, helping each other, brainstorm and all that kind of thing. So opine is sort of the same thing. In this case, it's also too serious. It's like opine or proclaiming our opinions would be more apt if they weren't in disparate fields. Disparate fields means that they don't really know what they're talking about about the other's project. So can they really give an informed opinion? No, they can't really debate it. So what they're doing is just sharing ideas and brainstorming. So C and D are wrong. And give some wisdom, again, is wrong because they're in disparate fields. They don't really know what they're talking about as much as the expert who's working on the project does, because this is like a co-working space where people from different fields, different areas that would be working from home otherwise go to meet. So the right answer is share advice, because it's lighthearted. It doesn't go too deep into like, oh, I'm telling you what to do. I'm sharing my wisdom or proclaiming my opinion. And this is the key. Because we know people who work in different fields couldn't really have an informed debate about one's specialty, one's specialization is the right word actually. Yeah. So with this, it's 3:29. So if you guys want to stay a little longer to make up for the time that I wasted for you when I got late, we could say like 10 minutes more if you guys want to do that. It's not mandatory.
Because I have classes with Miss Tally afterwards. Thank you very much. It was a wonderful class, and thank you for doing all the job of categorizing everything. And I'm going to send you my personal statement a bit later, please. Give it a read.
Okay.
Should it say give it a read or give it a read?
Read.
Anyway,
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
No problem. Bye. You're welcome. So if anybody wants to stick around, I might finish the whole test now, and I might not go over it anymore. I know a lot of you have class with Tally. I just also know that it's at 4. So if you want to stick around, I will stick around for 10 minutes more.
I have a meeting right this second. That's why I have to leave, but I would have loved to stick around. I'm sorry.
Completely fine. See you around.
Thank you for the class.
Yeah, thank you for the class. I have to go too.
Okay, the consolations of philosophy. Long viewed by many as a stereotypical useless major, philosophy is now being seen by many students and prospective employers as in fact a very useful and practical major, offering students a host of transferable skills with relevance to the modern workplace. In broad terms, philosophy is the study of meaning and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so in this case, we're sort of explaining generally what philosophy is. We're not giving an example because we haven't even explained what it is yet. We are not contrasting anything because we're explaining. Again, nevertheless also implies contrast. So the right choice here is in broad terms. And this is a transition choice type of question. Okay, philosophy, blah, blah, blah. But more pragmatically, this discipline encourages students to blah, 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 blah. Okay, so this is saying in a more pragmatic manner. So we have, this is a vocabulary choice question because we have the same idea phrased in different ways. So all of these, except maybe this one, are actually correct usage. So this is a question of condition. They're all saying the same thing, but which one says it in the most concise manner? Boom. So answer is no change. I'm gonna skip this because philosophy teaching students. So philosophy is our subject and we're looking at verb form. We have teaching, teaches, to teach, and teaching. And so we look at philosophy. This is a singular noun.
Yeah. Be.
that is in third person. So, well, first, we have to actually conjugate the verb. So, teaching, no, because we need an auxiliary verb to make this a conjugated form. And then between to teach and teaches, it was easier than I thought. To teach is actually an infinitive, so it doesn't really work. So only teaches works in this case. So B is the answer. This was a verb form question. Then we have to think about how to think. Blah, blah, blah. A 1994 survey concluded that 18% of American colleges require at least one. So let's look at this. This is talking in very positive terms about philosophy, right? About all the things it offers, the useful tools, what it teaches, not only this, but also that kind of thing. And then this says that only 18% of American colleges require at least one philosophy course. So this is sort of like a contrast sort of theme that we're having here, right? So quickly we can discard consequently and therefore, and leave notwithstanding and however. Notwithstanding the attractiveness of this course of study, students have resisted majoring in philosophy. However, despite its many utilitarian benefits, colleges have not always supported. Okay, so it comes down to a question of subject. Who are we talking about in this sentence? Only 18% of American colleges required at least one philosophy. Resisted majoring in does not make sense within that context. We're talking about colleges, so the option that sets up why colleges do not support this study is the right one. So D is the right choice in this case. And 37 is an idea development type of question. 38, therefore, between 1992 and 1996, more than 400 independent philosophy departments were eliminated from institutions. So this is adding information that goes on the same vein as the other one, right? As the stuff before. Sorry. So, since these are sort of both statistics that we're adding, we cannot set up therefore or thus because they're not concluding from each other. However indicates contrast, and we do not have contrast here. Moreover indicates additional information that's on the same topic. So that's the perfect choice in this case.
Peter, I have a question.
Yes.
What's the difference? Like, is there any difference between therefore and thus?
That's a very good question. And I'm not going to lie, I'm not going to try to mislead you by telling you one is different from the other because of so-and-so reason. Yeah, I think thus is just feels a little more concise. What I do, which doesn't mean this is what like standard English tells you, I generally use thus when it's more, when it's less narrative, when my argument is less narrative. They're both conclusive from what comes before, but thus I use more when we're talking about scientific information or conclusions from statistical data. However, when I'm like talking about sort of a literary analysis, therefore sounds more formal a little bit and it's a little longer and more elegant, I guess. But they sort of mean the same thing. And neither would be wrong in place of the other in any context. You could just choose one over the other based on the style, I guess. But there isn't a big difference between them. However, you just brought up a very good point that I'm gonna make visible to you guys. The fact that there's thus and therefore here means that probably neither of those is going to be the answer, because they're so similar that you probably could not tell which one was right and which one was wrong. So if you see two answers that you have no way of telling, this is a last resort, because it can really backfire if you're not like super 100% sure of the meaning. But if you have no other thing to hang on to, you can look at that. If there's two choices that mean exactly the same thing in your eyes, then probably neither of those is the right answer, because you're not going to be able to decide exactly for the reason that I just explained. They're very, very similar. Okay. More recently, colleges have recognized practicality increasing popularity, blah, 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 by 2008, there were 817 programs, up from this and this and that. In addition, the number of philosophy graduates. So this is also all talking about how philosophy is increasing in importance. Studies have found students who major in philosophy often do better than students from other majors in both verbal reasoning and analytical writing. These results can be blah, 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 blah. Okay, so we have options here. How do we effectively combine these sentences? This is combining ideas. Okay, so better than students on both verbal reasoning and analytical writing as measured by standardized test scores. Writing and these results can be measured. Writing, which can also be writing when the results are. So all of these use pronouns. And this one doesn't. A, we can see that it retains the meaning that we're going for. So if it retains the meaning and it is so much more concise, then why would we even bother with these, right? There's a longer explanation, but I'm not going to go through it because I want to finish the exam. On the graduate record examination, for example, students intending to apply to study philosophy in graduate school has scored higher, have scored, scores, and scoring. So we know students is plural, so we either use have scored or really none of the other ones, because has scored is singular, scores is singular, and scoring is not a valid verb conjugation. So have scored is the only possible answer in that case, and it's about verb form. These days, many student apostrophe S majoring, wrong because there's no possession there. So D is wrong too. So it's either many students majoring or many students major. We can see that there's a verb. So if this is all one clause, then we cannot have major there. Major in philosophy have no intention, wrong. So many students majoring in philosophy have no intention. That's the right answer. B is the right answer. 42 is talking about adding this sentence about Greek philosopher Plato, for example, who wrote many of his works in the form of dialogues. And this is talking about the practical uses of philosophy. So in all honesty, in this practical discussion of philosophy, Plato's teaching has no relevance whatsoever, because it blurs the paragraph's focus, introducing a new idea that goes unexplained. It does not undermine any claim because it does not go against anything that's being said. It's just a very irrelevant example or a very irrelevant detail that is added. Then that these skills are transferable across professions, which makes them, okay, that collides with which. We can either do that these without which, or these skills are transferable, which makes them, but not both, because two pronouns are unnecessary in that case. So using that and that, also not correct, because two pronouns is redundant, or at least unnecessary. That these skills are transferable across professions and makes them, no. Because, let me see, we're not really coordinating two equivalent clauses in that case. So the right answer in this case is deleting the underlined portion to leave it as that these skills are transferable across professions makes them. So what they're saying here is the fact that this happens makes them blah, 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 blah. Okay? This is acting as a noun. Okay. And then last question, because today's students can expect to hold multiple jobs, some of which may not even exist yet, during, and I'm going to go quickly to students. Students is third person plural, and we're looking for a pronoun. During one's lifetime, one is a general pronoun that's used when you're using like person or a non-specific person. So students is specific. We do know who students are. their students. So one is not correct. His or her, not correct because it's plural. And we have our, which is in the wrong person. It's first person instead of third. So there is third person and plural and the only one that fits in this case. Kind of intergalactic speed. Yeah, we're done. This is it. I went over 10 minutes, just barely. I hope you guys found this helpful, and I'll leave you to your next class now. See you all for reading and on
Thank
Friday.
you.
I really appreciate, teacher. Thank you so much.
Thank you for everything.
Hey, teachers, thank you for your help.
You're welcome.
You're right, teacher. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
All right.